The storm had torn through the northern highlands for 4 days without mercy. Rain fell in sheets so thick Leona Wynne could barely see the River Cale from her cottage window, yet she heard it, roaring like some ancient beast awakened from slumber, swallowing everything in its path. Trees, boulders, entire sections of the valley floor disappeared into the churning brown water that had boasted its banks the night before. Hello friends. Before we journey deeper into Leona's story, I invite you to subscribe and share in the comments where you're listening from. Your presence here matters. Now, let's continue. Leona stood on the narrow stone threshold of her cottage, a bundle of dried herbs clutched in her hands, watching the floodwaters creep steadily across what had once been meadow. She did not know how far the river would reach, but she felt it in her bones, the same instinct that had warned her of her husband's death 3 winters past. Too close. Far too close. Her thoughts fixed on the old timber bridge that connected her isolated homestead to the village road 5 miles distant. Should she try to cross before the river claimed it? The last 14 months alone had taught her to decide quickly. Since she had buried Thomas beneath the rowan tree, there was no one left to choose for her. It was only her now, a widow of 26, set against the world and the wild. Then came the sound. Not the roar of water, but something else, high-pitched, desperate, cutting through the storm like a blade. Leona dropped the herbs and ran to the fence line, her boots sinking into mud with each step. The bridge still stood, but barely, groaning under the assault of debris and current. And caught against the twisted pilings was something else entirely. A woven basket, the kind shepherds used for newborn lambs, wedged between 2 logs and filling rapidly with water. Inside, 2 small forms struggled, their cries barely audible over the storm. Pups. Wolf pups, drowning. The biting wind offered no mercy, and the water was already at her ankles when Leona stepped into the flooded pasture without hesitation. Her feet slipped in the mud, but she kept going, drawn forward by those cries, weak, smothered by rain, but unmistakable. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back. Wolves had taken Thomas. Wolves were death in fur. But these were not killers. These were babies. She waded in up to her knees, the cold cutting straight through her wool skirts like knives. The current tugged at her legs, trying to pull her under, but she could not stop. Not now. Leona seized the edge of the basket, her fingers shaking violently. Inside were 2 pups, soaked and trembling, their eyes barely open, crying in terror. Grey fur darkened by water. Small bodies rocking helplessly with each surge of current. Without thinking, Leona grabbed the basket and pressed it tight against her chest. She fought her way back through the water, pushing against a current that seemed determined to claim her. The pups cried louder, frightened by her scent, by the movement, by everything. The water dragged at her skirts, weighing her down. She stumbled, slipped on a submerged stone, but she would not let herself fall. When she finally reached the bank, she set the basket down carefully, well clear of the rising water. The pups were safe. She was not. Leona turned at once, her gaze sweeping upstream. That was when she saw him, a massive grey wolf lying among the rocks, half submerged, unmoving. Blood streaked the stones around him, washing away with each wave. Even from a distance, she could see the unnatural angle of his body, the gaping wounds that no animal could have inflicted. Silver glinted in one of the wounds. Hunter's weapons. The river was rising, pounding closer to where he lay. In minutes, perhaps seconds, the current would sweep him away. Grace looked back at the crying pups, then at the wounded wolf. Every rational thought screamed at her to leave him. He was dangerous. Likely dying. Not her responsibility. But the pups' cries intensified, raw and desperate, as if they knew. Leona stepped back into the current, deeper this time. The water struck her hard, rising past her waist in an instant. She grabbed the wolf by the thick fur at his shoulders and pulled with an effort that set her arms on fire. He was impossibly heavy, a dead weight that barely shifted. His body slid free of the rocks and fell partially into the water, but the current helped now, pushing him toward her rather than away. She caught him by the scruff and began to drag him, step by agonizing step. The river rose, pounding against her chest. Every movement tested her strength. She stumbled and fell to one side, swallowing muddy water, then forced herself up again. Her vision blurred. Her muscles screamed. But she could not stop. Not now. At last, she felt cold grass beneath her feet and saw the bank ahead. She hauled him up beside her, her entire body shaking with exhaustion. The pups were only a few yards away, still crying from their basket. Leona looked back. The bridge finally gave way with a sound like cannon fire, timbers exploding outward as the river claimed its prize. Debris swept past, whole trees, sections of fence, things she could not name. The valley was drowning. She stood there gasping, staring at the pups and the wolf, her whole body trembling. The rain had eased, thinning into a steady drizzle, but the ground remained heavy and treacherous beneath her feet. Leona lifted the basket again and moved farther from the river, climbing the pasture with careful steps. The wind still cut through her, carrying the scent of wet earth and something else, blood, fur, wildness. Each step felt longer than the last. The weight of the basket burned her arms. When she finally reached higher ground near the stone wall that marked the path back to her cottage, she sank to her knees and set the basket down, covering the pups with her own cloak, soaked and cold as it was. Then she turned back to the wolf. He lay where she had left him, unmoving. The rain, reduced now to a fine mist, streamed down his massive head. Water pooled in the hollow of his wounds. Leona did not hesitate. She walked back down the slope, took hold of his shoulders, her hands looked impossibly small against him, and pulled again. Slower now. Weaker. Exhaustion closing in like a vice. He was far too heavy. Every movement was a battle. The sodden grass clutched at her boots. Her arms burned. She felt her strength slipping away with each labored breath. And still she pulled. Step by step. Once more. When she finally dragged him beside the basket of pups, she stopped, bent over, gasping, sweat mingling with rain and river water. They were not safe yet, but they were closer. And for now, that would have to be enough. Leona had no milk, not the kind wolf pups draw from their mother's body. That was the first thought that struck her as she gathered the basket into her arms and staggered toward the cottage. The pups cried so hard their tiny bodies trembled, far too fragile to endure more cold, more hunger, more fear. She kicked the door open and stumbled inside, setting the basket near the hearth. Her hands shook as she stripped away the soaked woven lining, replacing it with dry cloths from her linen chest. The pups whimpered, their cries softening to exhausted mewls. Two small bodies, one slightly larger with grey fur tipped in silver, the other smaller, darker, with rust-colored markings along its ears and paws. Leona pressed them against her chest, offering warmth born more of instinct than reason. They nuzzled weakly, searching for something she could not give. But she could not think about that now. Not yet. She laid them carefully in a wooden crate lined with blankets and turned back to the door. The wolf still lay outside in the rain, dying if she did not act. The second trip nearly broke her. Dragging him across the threshold took strength she did not have left. His massive body scraped against the stone floor, leaving a trail of diluted blood and mud. By the time she hauled him close to the fire, Leona collapsed beside him, gasping, her vision swimming with black spots. The pups cried louder now, their voices gaining strength as the warmth of the cottage reached them. The sound tore at something deep in Leona's chest, an old, silent ache. She was 26. She had never had children. Thomas had died before such a possibility had ever existed, even as a promise. The pups needed food. Carefully, still trembling, she rose and went to the cupboard. Flour, dried beans, a little honey, salted fish, nothing fit for creatures so young. She thought quickly. Milk. She had a goat in the small barn behind the cottage, if the barn was still standing and the animal had not drowned or fled in terror. Leona laid a hand on each pup, murmuring softly, "I will return. I promise." She pulled her soaked cloak back over her shoulders and ran out into the rain, which had begun again in earnest. The barn still stood, though water seeped under the door. Inside, the sharp scent of wet hay and frightened animal filled her nose. The goat was there, bleating softly, eyes wide with fear. Leona spoke to her in a calm voice, almost a whisper, as she took down the wooden pail from its hook. She sat on the low stool and began to milk quickly, her hands shaking with cold and urgency. The milk streamed warm and white into the pail, steaming faintly in the icy air. She did not wait for it to fill. It was enough. She ran back. Inside, Leona shrugged off her soaked cloak and left it draped over the back of a chair. She warmed a small portion of the milk over the fire and tested it against her wrist, body temperature, as her grandmother had taught her for orphaned lambs. With a clean strip of cloth, She dipped the corner into the milk and brought it to the first pup's mouth. The grey one hesitated, then began to suck greedily, tiny paws kneading the air. Milk dribbled from the corner of its mouth, but most went down. Its small body relaxed incrementally with each swallow. The darker pup cried louder, desperate. Leona repeated the process, patient despite her exhaustion, dipping and offering, waiting for each swallow before giving more. The cries softened, thinning into tired little sounds that broke her heart and mended it in the same breath. Within minutes, both pups fed in silence, conquered by hunger and effort. Their eyes fluttered shut, their bodies finally eased into the deep sleep of the very young. She breathed for what felt like the first time in hours. Then she looked at the wolf. He was still unconscious, his breathing shallow and irregular. Leona knelt beside him, her healer's training pushing past her exhaustion. She laid a hand on his massive head, burning hot despite the cold that should have claimed him. Fever. His fur was matted with blood, mud, and river water. If she did nothing, infection would kill him before dawn. So she began to work. First, she needed to see the wounds clearly. Using shears from her medicine box, Leona carefully cut away the fur around the worst injuries, 3 deep gashes across his shoulder and flank, and burns. Silver burns. She recognized them from the stories, crescent-shaped, blistered, the flesh around them grey and necrotic. Someone had tried to kill him with hunter's weapons. With silver. Her hands stilled. Only one kind of creature died from silver. Leona's gaze moved to the pups, sleeping peacefully in their crate. Then back to the wolf. She had heard the stories all her life, shifters, the wolf clans that once ruled these highlands before retreating into myth. Her grandmother had sworn they were real. Her husband had laughed at such tales. Thomas had been wrong about many things. She shook herself and returned to the task. Truth or myth, the wolf was dying, and she knew how to treat wounds. Leona fetched hot water, salt, and her stores of medicinal herbs. She cleaned each wound methodically, flushing out debris and poison. The wolf's body twitched but did not wake. When she reached the silver burns, she hesitated. Embedded in the largest wound were 3 small fragments of metal, glinting dully in the firelight. They had to come out. Using a pair of thin forceps, Leona extracted the first piece. It burned her fingertips even through the metal tool, unnaturally hot. She dropped it into a clay bowl and reached for the second. The wolf's breathing hitched, a low whine building in his throat, but he remained unconscious. The third fragment was deepest. She had to dig slightly, her stomach churning as fresh blood welled up. Finally, it came free. As she dropped the last piece of silver into the bowl, the wolf's body shuddered violently. Leona jerked back, her heart hammering. For a brief, impossible moment, the wolf's form flickered. She saw a man's hand where a paw had been, fingers curled against the stone floor. A human shoulder, scarred and muscular, replaced grey fur. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the image vanished. The wolf lay before her once more, fully animal. Leona's hands froze in midair. "What are you?" she whispered. The pups stirred in their crate, both lifting their heads. The smaller one crawled to the edge, dark eyes fixed on her with an awareness that should not exist in something so young. Its gaze was too knowing, too human. A chill that had nothing to do with her wet clothes ran down Leona's spine. She was not sheltering animals. She was sheltering people. The wolf's breathing steadied slightly, his body relaxing now that the silver was removed. Leona applied poultices of comfrey, yarrow, and crushed garlic to each wound, then bandaged them with strips of clean linen. She worked in silence, her mind racing. When she finished, she covered him with every dry blanket she owned and built up the fire until heat filled the small cottage. The wolf's fever raged on, but his breathing grew marginally stronger. Leona sank into her chair, exhaustion finally claiming her. The pups slept. The wolf, the man, lay fighting for his life. And she sat between them, watching over strangers who were not strangers at all. Outside, night fell and the storm continued its assault. Inside, Leona whispered to the sleeping forms around her, telling stories she had once saved for children she would never have. Stories of brave wolves and kind women. Of impossible choices and unexpected grace. She did not sleep. She watched, guarded, and waited for dawn. Morning broke grey and cold, the kind of dawn that offered no promises. The rain had finally stopped, but the world outside Leona's window had been transformed into something unrecognizable. Where meadows had rolled gently toward the river, now stood a vast lake of muddy water, dotted with the skeletal remains of trees and fences. The valley was drowned, and she was an island. Leona stood at the window, a cup of weak tea cooling in her hands. She had not slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that flicker, fur becoming flesh, paw becoming hand. The rational part of her mind insisted it had been exhaustion, hallucination, the trick of firelight and fear. But the burns that had seared her fingertips told a different truth. She turned from the window. The pups were stirring in their crate, small sounds of waking hunger beginning to build. But it was not their movement that caught her attention. The wolf was awake. His amber eyes tracked her across the room with an intensity that made her breath catch. He did not growl, did not bare his teeth. He simply watched, his massive head resting on his paws, those impossible eyes following her every movement. Leona set down her tea slowly. "You're awake." The wolf's ears pricked forward at her voice. She moved carefully toward the crate where the pups were beginning to cry in earnest. "Your children are safe," she said, speaking to him as if he could understand every word. "They are hungry, but they are alive." The wolf's eyes shifted to the crate. Something passed across his face, if a wolf could be said to have expressions beyond instinct. Relief, perhaps. Or recognition. He tried to rise, his powerful legs trembling beneath him. He made it halfway up before collapsing back to the floor with a sound that was too human, too full of frustration and pain. Leona knelt beside him without thinking, her healer's instincts overriding her fear. "You'll tear your wounds open if you keep trying. You lost too much blood." The wolf's amber gaze fixed on her face, and Leona felt the weight of intelligence behind those eyes. He was not simply aware. He was thinking. She fetched the wooden bowl she had used the night before and filled it with water from her pitcher. Moving slowly, she set it before him. "Drink. You need water more than anything right now." The wolf lowered his head and drank, never breaking eye contact with her. The gesture felt significant somehow, as if he were testing her, measuring her trustworthiness with every lap of his tongue. The pup's cries grew more insistent. "I know," Leona murmured, rising. "I haven't forgotten you." She went to prepare their milk, warming it carefully, testing the temperature. When she returned to the crate and lifted the smaller pup, the one with rust-colored markings, its body felt different somehow. Warmer than before, almost feverish. The pup began to cry harder, its small body trembling in her hands. And then it happened. The fur rippled like water disturbed by wind. The small body in her hands shimmered, blurred, and suddenly Leona was holding a human infant. Naked, red-faced, wailing with a sound that was purely, unmistakably human. Leona gasped and stumbled backward, nearly dropping the child. A low growl rumbled from the wolf, not threatening, but warning. "Do not harm them." The infant shifted back almost immediately, exhausted by the effort, returning to a small rust-colored pup that lay panting in her trembling hands. Leona stood frozen, her heart hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears. "Sweet mercy," she whispered. "It's true. You're not just wolves." She sank to her knees, cradling the exhausted pup against her chest. Her mind raced through everything she knew, grandmother's stories, whispered legends, warnings given to children about the old places in the forest where the boundaries between worlds grew thin. Shifters. Wolf clans. The ancient bloodlines that walked on 4 legs and 2. She looked at the wolf, at the man trapped in wolf's form. "Your people. You're all people." The wolf held her gaze steadily, and in his eyes she saw confirmation, gratitude, and something else. Desperation. He dragged himself toward the door, every movement clearly agonizing. He was trying to leave, trying to pull his broken body away from her cottage, away from her. Leona understood with sudden, perfect clarity, he was trying to protect her by leaving. Whatever danger had found him, whatever enemy had driven Silver into his flesh and thrown him into the river, he believed it would follow. And he would not let it touch her. "Stop." Her voice came out stronger than she felt. "You'll die out there. And so will they." The wolf collapsed halfway to the door, his strength finally spent. His sides heaved with labored breathing. Leona set the pup back in the crate and moved to block the wolf's path. She knelt before him, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his fevered body, close enough to see the silver burns weeping beneath their bandages. "I don't know what you are," she said quietly. "I don't know why someone tried to kill you, or what you've done to deserve it. But I know this, those pups need you alive. They are babies, barely old enough to survive on their own. And Her voice wavered. "I will not let you die. Not while I have breath left to fight it." The wolf's amber eyes closed briefly, acceptance, surrender, gratitude all mixed together. He turned slowly, limping back to his place by the hearth. Each step seemed to cost him dearly, but he made it. When he settled back onto the blankets, he looked at her once more, and Leona could have sworn she saw tears gathering in those two human eyes. She returned to the pups, lifted them both, and brought them to their father. They crawled over the blankets, nuzzling against him, making small sounds of relief and recognition. The wolf curved his body around them protectively, his breath evening out for the first time since he'd woken. Leona watched the three of them, father and children, pack and family, and felt something shift in her chest. A decision made without words, a commitment born of compassion rather than obligation. Over the next 2 days, a rhythm formed in the cottage. Leona fed the pups every few hours, the cloth and milk method becoming easier with practice. She changed their makeshift bedding, cleaned them, kept them warm. She tended the wolf's wounds, changing bandages, applying fresh poultices, forcing him to drink water and thin broth made from salted fish and wild herbs. The wolf watched her constantly. Every movement, every gesture, every word she spoke to his children. She felt his gaze like a physical weight, but it no longer frightened her. He was learning her, she realized. Learning to trust. She began to speak more freely, narrating her actions as she worked. "This is comfrey, it helps wounds heal faster. Your shoulder is looking better, see? Less inflammation. Or, the grey one, I think he's the elder. He's protective of his brother. Tries to stay between me and the small one whenever I pick them up." She named them in her mind, Ash for the grey pup with silver-tipped fur, and Ember for the smaller one with rust-colored markings that glowed like coals in firelight. She did not name the wolf. He was not hers to name. He belonged to himself, to whatever life waited beyond her cottage walls. But she began to feel responsible for him nonetheless. Responsible for all of them. On the second evening, as she sat by the fire mending one of her torn skirts, Ash crawled out of the crate and made his way toward her on unsteady legs. The wolf tensed, watching, but did not intervene. The pup reached her and climbed clumsily onto her lap, curling into a ball against her stomach. Leona's hands stilled on her sewing. Warmth spread through her chest, painful and sweet and terrifying all at once. "Hello, little one," she whispered, setting aside her work to stroke his soft fur. "Are you claiming me now?" Ember followed his brother, settling against her other side. Together, the pups formed a warm, breathing weight in her lap, trusting her completely. When Leona looked up, she found the wolf's amber eyes fixed on her with an expression she could not name. Something between wonder and grief, hope and fear. Outside, the floodwaters remained. Inside, a fragile family took shape, born of necessity, watered with care, growing roots neither of them had planned. 5 days after the rescue, the wolf finally healed enough to shift. It happened at dawn. Leona woke from a light doze in her chair to find the cottage changed. The massive grey wolf no longer lay by the hearth. Instead, a man occupied that space, tall, broad-shouldered, covered only by the blanket she had draped over the wolf the night before. He was turned away from her, his back visible in the pale morning light filtering through the window. Dark hair streaked with silver fell past his shoulders. Scars crisscrossed his back, old wounds, the marks of a life spent fighting. His skin was deeply tanned, stretched over muscle and sinew that spoke of strength, even in injury. Leona's breath caught. She should look away, should give him privacy. But she found herself unable to move, transfixed by the simple reality of him. He was real. The stories were real. As if sensing her gaze, the man turned his head. Amber eyes, the same eyes that had watched her for days, met hers. "Thank you." His voice was rough, unused, scraping like stone on stone. Leona stood quickly, her face warming. I'll fetch you clothes." She moved to the trunk where she kept Thomas's things, the few items she had not been able to part with. A shirt, breeches, boots worn soft with age. She brought them to the hearth and set them on the chair, keeping her eyes averted. They were my husband's. He was smaller than you, I think. But they'll do until your own clothes dry. The man dressed slowly, every movement clearly painful. Leona busied herself stoking the fire, giving him what privacy she could in the small space. When she finally turned back, he sat in the chair, Thomas's shirt hanging open at the collar, the fabric stretched tight across his shoulders. He was staring at the pups in their crate with an expression of such raw tenderness that Leona felt she was intruding on something sacred. "Who are you?" she asked quietly. His gaze shifted to her. "Raiden Vaya, Alpha of the Moonfell Pack." He paused, as if expecting recognition. When she showed none, he continued, "Those are my sons. Ash and Ember." Leona's hands stilled. "I named them that. In my mind." "How did you?" "I heard you. Every word you spoke to them. To me." Something softened in his expression. "You gave them names when I could not. You gave them everything." Silence stretched between them. The pups began to stir, making small sounds of waking. "What happened to you?" Leona finally asked. Raiden's jaw tightened. His hands, resting on his knees, curled into fists. "My brother. Kale." And then the story poured out, bitter and bloody and brutal. Kale had coveted the alpha position for years, had gathered supporters who believed Raiden too soft, too willing to coexist with humans rather than dominate them. When Raiden's mate died giving birth to the twins, Kale saw his opportunity. A grieving alpha was a weak alpha. The ambush had been carefully planned. Kale arranged a border patrol, claimed reports of human hunters in their territory. Raiden went with a small guard, taking his infant sons because they could not yet tolerate separation from their father, a vulnerability Kale had counted on. The attack came at the river crossing. Silver weapons, hired human hunters, packmates Raiden had trusted turning on him. They killed his guards first, then came for him. "I fought," Raiden said, his voice hollow. "But there were too many, and the silver, it burns unlike anything else. Weakens us. Poisons our blood." He touched the bandages Leona had wrapped around his shoulder. "They threw me and my sons into the river. Kale wanted our deaths to look like an accident, the foolish alpha who took his infants too close to flood waters." "But you survived," Leona whispered. "The basket caught on debris. I fought the current until I couldn't anymore. Then I found the rocks. I thought." His voice broke. "I thought I would die there and leave them crying for help that would never come." Leona moved closer, drawn by the pain in his voice. "But help did come." Raiden looked at her then, truly looked, and the intensity in his amber eyes made her feel exposed, seen in a way she had not been since Thomas died. "You came. A human woman who should have fled from us, should have left us to our fate. Instead, you risked your life. You tended us. You became their mother when they had none. I only did what anyone." "No." He cut her off gently. "Not anyone. Most humans fear us. Hunt us. Even those who don't would have hesitated, thought of the danger, the cost. You did not hesitate at all." Leona's throat tightened. "They were helpless. You were dying. I couldn't just." The pups' cries grew louder, demanding attention. Leona turned gratefully to them, needing the escape from Raiden's gaze. She prepared their milk, settled into her chair, and began the familiar routine of feeding. Raiden watched in silence. When both pups had drunk their fill, he spoke again. "Kale has declared me dead. He has taken the alpha position, claimed leadership of Moonfell." His hands clenched. "And my sons, Ash and Ember, are heirs. Their existence threatens his claim. He will search for their bodies. When he cannot find them, he will send hunters." Cold dread settled in Leona's stomach. "Here? They'll come here." "Yes. The river may have bought us time. They would expect the current to carry us miles downstream. But Kale is thorough. He will widen the search." Raiden met her eyes. "They will come." "Then we prepare," Leona said, her voice steadier than she felt. Raiden stared at her. "You would fight for us? You don't even know us. I know you're a father. I know your children are innocent. I know someone tried to murder all of you for power." Leona's grip tightened on Ember, who had fallen asleep in her arms. "That's enough." Something shifted in Raiden's expression, surprise giving way to respect, then to something deeper. You're remarkable. I'm practical, Leona countered, though her face warmed. If danger is coming, we need to be ready. Over the following days, as Raiden's strength returned, he taught her things she had never imagined needing to know. How to recognize pack signs, territorial markings, scent trails, the difference between natural wolf howls and shifter calls. How to prepare weapons that could harm his kind, Silver, though it pained him to speak of it. How to protect herself if hunters came in wolf form. Leona shared her knowledge in return, the layout of the valley, hidden paths through the forest, places where the terrain itself could become an ally. She taught him about human resilience, about the strength found in vulnerability, in admitting fear while acting despite it. They did not speak of what was growing between them. But late one night, when Ember woke screaming from a nightmare, they both rushed to comfort her. Leona lifted the pup, now in human infant form, her small body shaking with terror. Raiden sat beside them, murmuring in the old language, a lullaby that had no words Leona understood but needed none. Ember calmed, her tiny hand gripping Leona's finger while her head rested against Raiden's palm. They sat close enough that their shoulders touched, close enough that Leona could feel the warmth of his body, smell the forest scent that clung to him even in human form. You're a natural mother, Raiden said softly. Leona's chest tightened. I was supposed to be. Once. The confession slipped out before she could stop it. Thomas and we tried. But he died before. I'm sorry. They sat in silence, shoulders touching, united in grief for the children they had lost and the strange, fierce love for the ones they now protected together. When Ash and Ember finally settled back to sleep, curled together in their crate, Leona and Raiden remained where they were. Neither wanted to break the moment, the fragile sense of rightness that had settled over them. Then, carried on the wind through the cracked window, came a sound that shattered the peace. A howl. Long, searching, ending in a hunting call that made Raiden's entire body go rigid. Kale's scouts, he whispered. Leona's hand found his without thinking. How long do we have? Raiden's amber eyes met hers in the firelight. Days. Maybe less. They sat together in the darkness, their hands clasped between them, listening to the distant howls grow closer. Outside, danger gathered. Inside, something precious and impossible took root, a family born of desperation, a love neither had sought but both desperately needed. And time, like the river that had brought them together, was running out. Leona was gathering herbs from the small garden behind her cottage when she saw them. 2 wolves, larger than any natural animal, circling the perimeter of her property with the methodical precision of hunters who had tracked prey before. They moved with purpose, noses to the ground, following a scent trail that could only lead to one thing. Her blood turned to ice. She dropped the basket of feverfew and ran for the cottage, her boots slipping in the mud. Inside, Raiden was already moving, his body tense with the predator's awareness. He had heard them before she had seen them. Take the pups, he said, his voice low and controlled. Hide them in the root cellar. Leona scooped Ash and Ember from their crate, both in human form now, able to hold the shape for hours at a time. They sensed the danger and clung to her, silent with an instinct older than words. She had just closed the cellar door when the scratching began at the cottage entrance. Then came the shift, the sound of bones rearranging, flesh reforming. When the knock sounded, it was knuckles against wood, not claws. Open up, a male voice called. We mean no harm. We're searching for someone. Leona looked at Raiden. He shook his head sharply and moved toward the back of the cottage, beginning to shift. She understood, he could not face them as a man, not yet. He was still too weak, and they would recognize him immediately. She took a breath, smoothed her skirt, and opened the door only wide enough to show her face. 2 men stood on her threshold, both naked and unbothered by it, their bodies still steaming from the shift. One was lean and scarred, with pale eyes that held no warmth. The other was broader, younger, with a cruel set to his mouth. Can I help you? Leona kept her voice steady. The scarred one smiled without humor. We're tracking someone. A traitor named Raiden Vaya and his whelps. Have you seen anything unusual? Wolves, perhaps? Signs of shifters. I've seen nothing but flood water and rain for a week, Leona said. I'm alone here, and I'd appreciate it if you moved along. The younger one's nostrils flared. You're lying. I can smell them. Wolf scent all over this place. He moved to push past her. Leona grabbed the iron poker from beside the door and swung it hard, catching him across the shoulder. The man stumbled back with a snarl of surprise and pain. This is my land, Leona said, raising the poker again. You're not welcome here. Leave. Now. The scarred one laughed. Human law doesn't apply to pack business, woman. Step aside before you get hurt. No. The word hung in the air between them. Then both men began to shift, their bodies blurring and reforming. In seconds, two massive wolves stood where the men had been, lips curled back to show teeth designed to kill. They lunged. Raiden hit them from the side like an avalanche of fur and fury, his own shift complete. Even wounded, even weak, he was larger than both of them, and he fought with the desperation of a father protecting his young. The scarred wolf went down first, Raiden's jaws clamping around his throat. But the younger one circled, looking for an opening, and found it, Raiden's wounded shoulder. Teeth sank into the barely healed flesh, tearing bandages and reopening the silver burns. Raiden howled in pain. Leona didn't think. She grabbed the kettle of boiling water from the fire and threw it at the attacking wolf. The animal yelped and released its grip, giving Raiden the opening he needed. He threw the younger wolf against the stone wall with a sickening crack. The fight became brutal, desperate. The cottage filled with the sounds of snarling, the crash of furniture, the metallic smell of blood. Leona armed herself with whatever she could find, knives, fireplace tools, the heavy cast-iron pan her grandmother had left her. When the scarred wolf turned on her, jaws snapping toward her throat, she drove a kitchen knife into its shoulder. The animal screamed and pulled back. Together, woman and wolf, human and shifter, they drove the attackers toward the door. The younger one was already limping badly. The scarred one kept glancing between Raiden and Leona, reassessing the threat. Finally, with a snarl of frustration, the scarred wolf shifted back to human form. Blood ran from multiple wounds. This isn't over. Kale will hear of this. He'll send more. Stronger ones. Tell Kale his brother lives. Raiden's voice came from behind Leona. She turned to find him in human form, naked and bleeding but standing tall. Tell him I'm coming for him. The younger shifter grabbed his companion and they fled, shifting as they ran, disappearing into the flooded landscape. Leona slammed the door and bolted it, her hands shaking violently. The cottage looked like a battlefield, furniture overturned, blood on the floors and walls, her few possessions scattered and broken. In the sudden silence, she heard crying from the cellar. The pups. She ran to them, flung open the door. Ash and Ember sat on the dirt floor, both in human form, tears streaming down their small faces. She gathered them into her arms, holding them tight. It's all right, she whispered, though it was far from all right. You're safe. I've got you. When she carried them back upstairs, Raiden had collapsed into the chair, blood seeping from his reopened wounds. His face was grey with pain and exhaustion. They'll send more, he said quietly. What I said, it was bravado. I can barely stand, let alone fight. His amber eyes met hers. We can't stay here, Leona. This cottage is marked now. They know. Leona settled the pups on the floor with a wooden toy and moved to examine Raiden's wounds. Then what do we do? Raiden was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. There's someone who can help. Torvin, my second-in-command. He opposed Kale's coup but was outnumbered. Last I heard, he was gathering evidence, building support among the packs who believe in the old laws. Where is he? 3 days' journey south, through the mountains. If I can reach him, if we can gather enough support, we can challenge Kale before the pack council. It's the only way to end this legally, to ensure my son's safety. Leona began cleaning his wounds again, her hands steady despite her racing heart. Then we go. All of us. No. Raiden caught her wrist gently. The journey is too dangerous. Kale's hunters patrol those mountains. I'll have to travel fast, stay hidden, move through territory where humans can't follow. His voice dropped. I can't take the pups. They're too young, too vulnerable. The shift exhausts them, and they can't maintain it long enough. Understanding crashed over Leona like cold water. You're asking me to keep them here? To hide them while you're gone. I'm asking you to do what you've already done, save their lives. Raiden's hand tightened on her wrist. You're the only one I trust. The only one who's proven they'll fight for my sons as fiercely as I would. Leona's throat constricted. What if you don't come back? Then raise them. Teach them to be kind, like you. Teach them that strength isn't only in dominance, that love is more powerful than fear. His amber eyes held hers. Make them better than I was. Stop. Leona pulled her hand free and cupped his face, forcing him to look at her. You're coming back. You will defeat your brother, you will reclaim your position, and you will return to your sons. I won't accept anything else. Raiden leaned into her touch, his eyes closing. How can you have such faith? Because I've watched you fight for them. Because I've seen who you are when everything is stripped away. She stroked her thumb across his scarred cheek. Come back to them, Raiden. They need their father. And what about you? His eyes opened, intense and searching. What do you need? The question hung between them, weighted with everything they hadn't said, everything that had grown in the quiet moments of caring for his children together. Before Leona could answer, Ash crawled over and tugged at Raiden's leg. Papa. Raiden lifted his son into his arms, holding him close. Ember followed, and soon both children were wrapped in their father's embrace. He whispered to them in the old language, words that sounded like promises and prayers. Leona watched, her heart breaking and healing in the same moment. That night, Raiden prepared to leave. He would go at dawn, traveling in wolf form, using speed and stealth to reach Torvin before Kael could send more hunters. In the hour before sunrise, he held each of his sons, memoizing their faces, whispering words only they could hear. Then he turned to Leona. Thank you, he said simply. For everything. Leona wanted to say so much, wanted to tell him to be careful, to come back, to not leave her here wondering if he was alive or dead. Instead, she said, they'll be waiting for you. We'll all be waiting. Raiden touched her face, his calloused fingers gentle against her cheek. His amber eyes held hers for a long moment, communicating everything words could not. Then he shifted and was gone, a grey shadow disappearing into the pre-dawn mist. Leona stood in the doorway long after he vanished, her hand pressed to her chest where her heart ached with a longing she didn't want to name. Behind her, Ash and Ember began to cry, high, keening sounds of loss and fear. She closed the door, gathered them into her arms, and whispered the lie they all needed to believe, he'll come back. Your father will come back. Days turned to weeks, and the silence became its own kind of torment. Leona moved the pups 2 days after Raiden left, gathering only what they could carry and abandoning the cottage that had become too exposed, too known. She remembered her grandmother's shepherd hut, deep in the high pastures where the mountains began, accessible only by a narrow track that disappeared in winter. It had been abandoned for years, but it would shelter them. More importantly, it would hide them. The journey took most of a day. Leona carried supplies on her back and Ash in her arms, while Ember walked in wolf form beside her, staying close to her skirts. The pups were growing quickly. Shifter children developed faster than human ones, their bodies racing through infancy toward independence that both awed and frightened her. The hut still stood, though barely. Leona spent the first week making it habitable, patching the roof with pine branches and moss, sealing gaps in the walls with mud and stones, building up the hearth until it could hold heat through the cold mountain nights. Her days revolved entirely around Ash and Ember. She woke before dawn to prepare their milk, still goat's milk, though she had begun adding mashed vegetables and soft bread as they grew. She cleaned them, dressed them when they held human form, brushed their fur when they shifted. She taught them words in both languages, human speech and the howls that were their birthright. Ash was bold and protective, always placing himself between Leona and any perceived threat, a shadow at the window, the crack of a branch outside. He shifted easily now, moving between forms with the unconscious grace of breathing. In human form, he had his father's amber eyes and dark hair, already showing the serious expression of someone who understood danger. Ember was gentler, curious about everything. She brought Leona flowers she found growing between rocks, sat quietly while Leona worked, and asked endless questions in her small, lilting voice. Why is sky blue? Where did Papa go? When he come back? That last question broke Leona's heart every time. Soon, she would say, holding Ember close. Your father will come back soon. But the weeks stretched on, and Leona began to doubt her own reassurances. At night, when the children finally slept, she allowed herself to imagine the worst. Kale's hunters finding Raiden on the mountain passes. A fight in the dark. Blood on stone. Or perhaps something worse. Raiden reaching Torvin only to find the support had crumbled, the evidence insufficient, the challenge to Kale's rule failing. Perhaps he was alive but defeated, unable to return to children who would forever be targets. Perhaps he had simply chosen survival over fatherhood. That thought came in her darkest moments, and she hated herself for it. She had seen Raiden with his sons, had witnessed the raw love and desperate protectiveness. But grief made cruel suggestions, and loneliness gave them weight. One evening, as Leona sat mending yet another torn shirt, a visitor arrived. An old woman appeared at the hut's entrance, human but with eyes that held ancient knowledge. She wore simple clothes and carried a walking stick, but Leona sensed power beneath the humble exterior. "Leona Wynne," the woman said, her voice like dry leaves rustling. "The wolves speak of you." Leona stood quickly, positioning herself between the stranger and the children. "Who are you? A friend? Or near enough?" The woman's gaze moved to Ash and Ember, who watched her with wary curiosity. The human who defied the Alpha's hunters. Who sheltered the heirs when their own pack would have killed them. "You've caused quite a stir in our world." "Our world?" "The old world. The world of those who walk between." The woman smiled faintly. "I am neither fully human nor shifter, but something older. I watch the boundaries, keep the peace where I can." "Why are you here?" "To bring news. And to ask a question." The woman moved closer, her stick tapping against the wooden floor. "The pack is in turmoil. Kale rules through fear, but his hold is not absolute. Whispers of Raiden's survival have spread. Some believe. Some hope." Leona's heart hammered. "Have you seen him? Is he alive?" "I cannot say. The mountains hide many secrets." The woman's expression softened. "But I can tell you this, hunters are widening their search. They know the heirs survived. They will find this place eventually." Fear lanced through Leona. "How long do we have?" "Weeks, perhaps. Maybe less if Kale grows desperate." The woman turned to look at the children again. "Which brings me to my question, why do you protect them? They are not your blood. You could leave, return to human settlements, forget this ever happened." Leona didn't hesitate. "They're my children in every way that matters." The woman studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Then you understand what it means to be pack. Family is not only blood, it's choice, sacrifice, love given freely." She reached into her cloak and pulled out a small leather pouch. "Take this. Herbs that will mask their scent, make them harder to track. Use it sparingly." Leona accepted the pouch. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. What's coming will test you in ways you cannot imagine." The woman moved toward the door, then paused. "One more thing, if you must run, go north. There are settlements there, far beyond pack territories, where humans and shifters live in secret peace. They would shelter you." Then she was gone, disappearing into the twilight as silently as she had come. Leona stood holding the pouch, her mind racing. She could run north, could take Ash and Ember beyond the reach of their uncle's hunters. She could raise them in safety, teach them to hide their nature, give them a life free of violence and pack politics. But it would mean giving up on Raiden. It would mean accepting he was never coming back. She looked at the children, Ash practicing his shifting, Ember drawing pictures in the dirt with a stick. They were happy here, as happy as children could be while living in hiding. But they asked about their father every day. They waited for him with a faith Leona struggled to maintain. She made her decision. She would stay. She would wait a little longer. But she would also prepare. Over the following days, Leona began planning their escape route north. She studied the terrain, marked the paths in her memory, gathered supplies that could be packed quickly. She taught Ash and Ember to stay quiet when she gave the signal, to shift and run if danger came. She did not tell them they might never see their father again. She couldn't bear to extinguish that hope in their eyes. 6 weeks had passed since Raiden left when the first snow came. Leona woke to find the world transformed, covered in white that muffled all sound. She built up the fire and prepared breakfast while Ash and Ember pressed their faces to the window, marveling at the falling flakes. "Papa loves snow," Ember said softly. "He told me. Before their mother died. Before Kale's betrayal. Before everything fell apart." Leona knelt beside her and pulled her close. "Then we'll save some for him. When he comes back, we'll show him how beautiful it is." But her voice cracked on the words, and Ember looked up at her with two wise eyes. "You don't think he's coming, do you, Mama?" The word, Mama, pierced Leona's heart. Ember had started using it a week ago, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. Ash had followed his sister's lead. They called her Mama now, naturally, as if she had always been theirs. Leona cupped Ember's small face. "I don't know, sweetheart. I hope with everything I have. But I need you to understand something. Whether your father comes back or not, you will always have me. Always. I will never leave you." Ember's eyes filled with tears. "Promise." "I promise." That night, after the children slept, Leona allowed herself to grieve properly for the first time. She wept for Raiden, who might be dead or lost or defeated. She wept for the family they had almost been, for the connection that had grown between them in the quiet moments of caring for his children. She wept for herself, for the loneliness that had become familiar, for the hope that had been foolish from the start. When the tears finally stopped, she felt hollowed out but somehow stronger. She had made her choice. She would raise Ash and Ember with or without their father. She would love them, protect them, teach them to be kind and strong and brave. She would be enough. The next morning, Leona began packing. Not everything, just what they would need if they had to run quickly. She hid the pack in the cellar beneath a loose board, ready to grab. As she worked, Ash came to stand beside her. "We're leaving. Maybe. If we have to. But I hope we don't." Leona touched his dark hair. "I hope your father comes back and makes all of this unnecessary." "Me too," Ash said quietly. Then, with the blunt honesty of a child, "But if he doesn't, it's okay. We have you." Leona pulled him into her arms and held tight, this fierce little boy who was learning too young that the world was dangerous and love was fleeting. 7 weeks. 8. The snow deepened, and still no word came. Leona accepted the pain of loss, wrapped it around herself like a cloak, and kept living. For Ash and Ember, she kept going. She would have chosen Raiden if he had come back. Would have built a life with him, joined his world, stood beside him as his mate and equal. But he hadn't come back. So she would build a different life, quieter, harder, but no less full of love. And if someday he returned, if by some miracle he walked back into their lives, she would have to decide whether to forgive the waiting, the silence, the pain of not knowing. But that was a bridge she would cross when she came to it. For now, she had 2 children to raise, a winter to survive, and a future to build from the ashes of what might have been. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering everything in white silence. The wolf's howl pierced the winter night, different from the hunting calls Leona had learned to dread. This howl carried recognition, longing, a voice she knew. Her heart stopped. She grabbed the knife she now kept within reach and moved to the window. Ash and Ember woke immediately, their shifter senses more acute than hers. They ran to the door, both shifting to wolf form, their small bodies trembling with excitement. "Papa!" Ember's voice came out as a kit's yip, high and desperate. Leona threw open the door. A wolf stumbled into the clearing, grey fur matted with blood and snow, limping badly, one eye swollen shut. But those amber eyes were unmistakable. Raiden collapsed on her threshold. The pups swarmed him, whining and licking his face, their small bodies pressing against his larger one. Leona fell to her knees beside them, her hands shaking as she touched his blooded fur. "You're alive," she whispered. "You came back." Raiden shifted, the transformation clearly painful. He lay naked in the snow, covered in wounds both fresh and healing, his body thinner than she remembered. But alive. Impossibly, miraculously alive. "I promised," he said, his voice hoarse. "I promised I would come back." Leona and the children dragged him inside. She wrapped him in blankets, built up the fire, began the familiar ritual of tending his wounds. Her hands worked automatically while her mind reeled. 2 months. He had been gone 2 months, and every day she had convinced herself he was dead. What happened? she asked as she cleaned a deep gash across his ribs. Raiden's story came in fragments, interrupted by pain and exhaustion. He had found Torvin, but gathering support had taken longer than expected. Kale's fear tactics had worked. Many pack members were too frightened to oppose him openly. But Torvin had been meticulous, collecting testimonies from those who had witnessed the ambush, finding the human hunters Kale had hired and extracting confessions. When they finally had enough evidence, they brought their case before the Grand Council, the gathering of alphas from all the northern packs who adjudicated disputes too large for any single pack to settle. The challenge had been brutal. Kale fought with the desperation of someone who knew defeat meant exile or death. The battle lasted hours, witnessed by hundreds. Raiden bore the scars of that fight across his entire body. But he had won. Kale was exiled, forbidden from ever claiming pack status again. His supporters were given the choice: submit to Raiden's leadership or leave Moonfell territory. Most had submitted. "It's over," Raiden said, his amber eyes closing. "My sons are safe. The pack is mine again." Leona's hands stilled on the bandage she was wrapping. That's wonderful. You did it." She should feel relieved. Grateful. The danger had passed. Ash and Ember could grow up without fear of assassination. But all she felt was a growing emptiness. Over the next 3 days, as Raiden healed, Leona began to see the change in him. He was no longer the desperate father who had whispered promises in the dark, who had looked at her with vulnerability and need. He was the alpha now, confident, commanding, already thinking about pack politics and territorial concerns. He spoke of returning to Moonfell lands, of rebuilding, of establishing order. He referred to Ash and Ember as the A's in a way that felt formal, distant. He thanked Leona repeatedly for her service, her invaluable care, as if she had been hired help rather than the woman who had loved his children as her own. The intimacy they had shared, the quiet moments, the unspoken understanding, seemed to have evaporated. Leona told herself she understood. He had a pack to lead, responsibilities that went far beyond one small family. He was returning to his world, and she had always been temporary. But understanding didn't stop the pain. On the 4th day, Raiden announced they would leave in 3 days' time. "The pack is eager to see the A's," he said, watching Ash and Ember play in the snow. "And I need to establish my authority fully. Too long absent and challenges begin." "Of course," Leona said, her voice carefully neutral. "You should go home." Raiden looked at her then, really looked, and something flickered in his eyes. "Leona. I'll help you pack supplies for the journey. The children will need warm clothes, food that travels well." She turned away, busying herself with unnecessary tasks. "How long is the journey to Moonfell?" 4 days if we travel steadily." 4 days. Then they would be gone, and she would be alone again. The thought was suffocating. That evening, while Raiden taught Ash and Ember a traditional pack song, Leona slipped away to the cellar. She retrieved the pack she had hidden weeks ago, the one prepared for escape, and began to add her own possessions. Not many. She had arrived with almost nothing, and she would leave the same way. She couldn't stay here, in this hut full of memories. She would return to human settlements, perhaps travel to one of the towns her grandmother had spoken of. Start over. Again. The thought of watching Raiden leave, of standing in the doorway waving goodbye while Ash and Ember looked back with confused, hurt eyes, asking why Mama wasn't coming, she couldn't bear it. Better to leave first. Spare them all the prolonged agony of farewell. She was folding her spare dress when Raiden appeared in the cellar doorway. "What are you doing?" Leona didn't turn around. "Packing." "I can see that." "Why?" "I'm leaving. Tomorrow, before dawn. It's better this way." Silence. "Then, you're leaving? Just like that?" The disbelief in his voice sparked anger in her chest. She spun to face him. "What did you expect? That I would stay here forever, playing nursemaid in an abandoned hut? You have your pack, your position, your sons. You don't need me anymore." "That's not." "It's fine, Raiden. You don't owe me anything." Her voice cracked despite her best efforts. "I understood what this was from the beginning. Temporary. Necessary. You needed someone to keep your children alive, and I did that. Now you can take them home and resume your real life." Raiden descended the steps slowly. "My real life?" As alpha. As their father. In your world, where you belong. Leona turned back to her packing, unable to look at him. I was just a refuge. A safe harbor during the storm. Now the storm has passed. Is that truly what you think? His voice was low, dangerous. That you were merely convenient. Weren't I? She faced him again, all her hurt and anger spilling out. You've been here 4 days, Raiden. 4 days of planning your departure, organizing your return, treating me with the polite gratitude you'd show any helpful stranger. Not once have you mentioned me coming with you. Not once have you suggested I might have a place in whatever comes next. You want to come to Moonfell? The hope in his voice made her want to scream. I want to be more than the human who kept your children alive while you were gone. I want. She stopped, swallowing hard. It doesn't matter what I want. It matters to me. Does it? Leona's laugh was bitter. You saved my life. My sons' lives. I owe you everything. I don't want your debt. The words burst from her. I don't want your gratitude or your obligation or your polite thanks. I want. She pressed her hands to her face. I want what I can't have. A family. Children who call me Mama and mean it forever, not just until their real life begins. A man who sees me as more than a temporary refuge, who... She couldn't finish. The tears came hard and fast, all the grief and loneliness and desperate hope she had tried to bury for 2 months. Raiden stood frozen, his expression unreadable. Leona wiped her eyes roughly and picked up her pack. I'm sorry. That was unfair. You've been nothing but honest. I'm the one who let myself imagine something that was never real. She moved toward the stairs, intending to push past him. Raiden caught her arm. Wait. Let me go. No. His grip was gentle but firm. Not until you hear me. There's nothing to say. There's everything to say, and I've been a fool not to say it sooner. He turned her to face him, his amber eyes blazing. You think you were convenient? You think I see you as merely useful? Don't. Leona tried to pull away. Don't make this harder. You saved my sons when I couldn't. You fought for them, bled for them, became their mother in every way that matters. You gave them love I couldn't provide, safety I couldn't guarantee. And somewhere in those quiet nights of feeding and healing and caring, you became. His voice dropped. You became everything. Leona's breath caught. I've been distant because I'm terrified, Raiden continued. Terrified that you would refuse what I want to ask. That you would choose your world over mine. That I would lose you and it would hurt worse than any wound Kale ever gave me. What are you saying? I'm saying I'm a fool. I'm saying I've handled this badly. I'm saying, he released her arm and stepped back. I need to do this properly. And then, to Leona's complete shock, Raiden Vaya, alpha of the Moonfell pack, knelt before her in the dirt of the cellar floor. What are you doing? Something I should have done the moment I returned. His amber eyes met hers, vulnerable and fierce. Stay, Leona. Not as a caretaker. Not as someone who helped in a crisis. Stay as my mate. As Ash and Ember's mother. As my equal. Leona's heart hammered. You don't mean that. You're grateful, that's all. I mean it more than I've meant anything in my life. Raiden's voice was raw. You gave my sons what I never could, unconditional love. You gave me a reason to fight beyond duty or vengeance. You showed me that strength isn't only in dominance, that love is more powerful than fear. You are the heart of this family. I'm human. Your pack. Will learn to accept you or answer to me. His jaw set stubbornly. I am alpha. My word is law. And my word is that you belong at my side, if you'll have me. Leona stared at him, this powerful man kneeling in the dirt, offering her everything she had wanted and been too afraid to name. I don't know how to be an alpha's mate, she whispered. Neither do I. I only know how to be a man who loves you. Raiden reached for her hand. We'll figure it out together. Outside, they heard Ash calling, Mama. Papa. Where are you? Their children. Somehow, without either of them quite planning it, that's what they had become. Leona looked at their joined hands, at this man who had been wolf and stranger and father and friend, who was now offering her a future she had given up hoping for. Get up, she said softly. Raiden rose slowly, uncertainty flickering across his face. Leona dropped her pack and stepped into his arms. An alpha shouldn't kneel. But a man asking the woman he loves to stay, that's different. She felt his body sag with relief. Yes. Yes. She pulled back to look at him. But I have conditions. A smile tugged at his mouth. Name them. Ash and Ember are mine. Not just in title, but in truth. I will raise them, protect them, make decisions about their welfare. Done. And I won't be a decoration at your side. If I'm your mate, I'm your partner. Equal voice, equal authority. Done. And you will spend the rest of your life proving I made the right choice. Raiden pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. You already have. You made the right choice the moment you stepped into that river. They kissed as footsteps thundered overhead, two small bodies searching for their parents. When Ash and Ember found them in the cellar, wrapped in each other's arms, both children simply smiled. Told you, Ash said to his sister. Told you Mama would stay. Ember nodded sagely. Now we're a real family. And they were. They traveled together to Moonfell, a family of 4 making their way through winter mountains toward a future none of them could have imagined 2 months before. Raiden carried Ember on his shoulders while she shrieked with delight. Ash walked beside Leona, his small hand clasped in hers, chattering about everything and nothing. They looked like any family on a journey, until you noticed the way Raiden scented the air for danger, or the way both children shifted to wolf form and back as easily as breathing. On the 3rd day, they crested the final ridge and Leona saw Moonfell for the first time. The valley spread below them like something from a dream, a mixture of natural wilderness and deliberate cultivation. Homes built into hillsides and among trees, smoke rising from chimneys, paths winding between structures that seemed to grow organically from the landscape. And everywhere, wolves. Some in animal form, others human, all moving through the settlement with purpose. It's beautiful, Leona breathed. It's home. Raiden's hand found hers. You're home now, if you'll claim it. As they descended, wolves began to notice their approach. Heads turned. Bodies stilled. A ripple of awareness spread through the valley like wind through grass. The alpha had returned. And he had not returned alone. By the time they reached the valley floor, hundreds of shifters had gathered, a sea of faces both human and wolf, all watching with curiosity, suspicion, hope, or fear. Leona felt the weight of their stares and forced herself to stand tall, chin high, hand firmly clasped in Raiden's. An older man pushed through the crowd, grizzled, scarred, with eyes that held both warmth and wariness. He shifted to human form as he approached. Torvin, Raiden greeted him with obvious relief. My alpha. Torvin embraced him roughly, then turned his gaze to Leona and the children. These must be the heirs. They've grown. This is Ash and Ember, Raiden said. Then, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd, and this is Leona Wynn. My mate. Shocked silence rippled through the assembly. A human, someone called from the crowd. You claim a human as mate. Raiden's voice turned to steel. I claim the woman who saved my sons when our own pack would have murdered them. The woman who risked her life, who fought beside me, who became a mother to my children when they had none. Yes, she is human. She is also braver than most of you, stronger than many, and wiser than I deserve. He shifted to wolf form and howled, the alpha's call, commanding and absolute. Then shifted back, Leona still at his side. Leona Vea will be honored as I am honored. She will be obeyed as I am obeyed. Anyone who challenges this challenges me directly. Silence. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, a single wolf howled acceptance. An old female, Leona would later learn, who had lost her own children to Kale's purge. Another joined. Then another. The sound built like a wave until the entire valley rang with howls. Welcome, acceptance, recognition. Leona felt tears prick her eyes. Raiden squeezed her hand. Welcome home, he murmured. The bonding ceremony took place 3 days later, under the full moon, witnessed by the entire pack. Leona wore a dress woven from materials she didn't recognize, soft as silk but strong as leather, dyed deep forest green. Flowers from the winter garden were braided into her red hair. She felt both terrified and exhilarated. Raiden stood before her in the ceremonial circle, wearing nothing but loose trousers and the marks of leadership painted across his chest in ochre and ash. His amber eyes glowed in the moonlight. An elder spoke the ancient words, in the old language first, then translated for Leona's benefit. Words about loyalty and love, strength and sacrifice, the binding of two souls across the boundaries of blood and bone. When the elder asked if Leona accepted the bond, she didn't hesitate. I do. A crimson cord was wrapped around their joined hands, binding them together. Raiden spoke his vows in the old language, his voice carrying across the silent assembly. Leona didn't understand all the words, but she understood enough. Protection, devotion, partnership, love. When it was her turn, she spoke in her own language, from her own heart. I vow to stand beside you in joy and in sorrow. To raise your children, our children, with love and wisdom. To be your partner, not your possession. To challenge you when you're wrong and support you when you're right. To bridge the gap between your world and mine. And to love you, Raiden Vaya, for all my days. The elder unwound the cord and held it aloft. Bound by choice, blessed by the moon, witnessed by the pack. Let no one separate what has been joined here. The howling began again, joyful and triumphant. Raiden pulled Leona into his arms and kissed her as the pack celebrated around them. Ash and Ember crashed into their legs, both giggling and talking over each other. Now you're really our mama. Ember declared. Forever and ever. Forever and ever, Leona agreed, her heart so full it hurt. The weeks that followed were not easy. Leona struggled with pack hierarchy, with customs she didn't understand, with wolves who resented her presence or questioned her authority. Some challenges were small, learning which plants were sacred, understanding the significance of territory markers. Others were larger, dealing with wolves who refused to accept a human in a position of power. But Raiden stood beside her through all of it, and gradually, the pack began to change. Leona brought human knowledge to pack medicine, saving lives that would have been lost to infection or fever. She mediated disputes with a fairness that won respect. She taught pack children human language and customs, building bridges between worlds. Most importantly, she loved the Alpha's children with a fierceness that could not be questioned. The pack saw Ash and Ember thrive under her care, saw them grow confident and kind and strong, and doubts began to fade. Raiden, in turn, transformed his leadership. He added human healers to the pack council. He established laws protecting the vulnerable. He ruled with strength but also mercy, showing that power and compassion were not opposites but complements. When pack members asked why he had changed, he said simply, "My mate taught me that there are many kinds of strength. The greatest is choosing love over fear." 6 months after the bonding ceremony, Leona stood on the ridge overlooking Moonfell, watching the valley come alive with spring. Wildflowers dotted the meadows. Wolves played in the streams. Children, both shifter and human, for Raiden had extended sanctuary to human refugees, ran through the settlement without fear. Ash and Ember raced past her, both in wolf form now, their fur gleaming in the sunlight. They had grown so much, would soon begin formal training as aides. But they still came to her every night for stories, still called her Mama with voices full of love. Footsteps approached from behind. Leona smiled before turning, knowing those steps by heart. Raiden wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. Regrets. Leona placed her hands over his, feeling the roughness of his scars, the strength of his grip. Not one. Even when Elder Meris questioned your decision about the hunting grounds yesterday. Even then. She came around eventually. You're remarkable, Raiden murmured against her hair. I'm stubborn. That too. They stood in comfortable silence, watching their children play, watching their pack move through the valley with the ease of belonging. Then Leona placed one of Raiden's hands on her stomach, where a small life was just beginning to grow. He went very still. Leona. Our third, she said softly. The healers confirmed it yesterday. Raiden turned her in his arms, his amber eyes blazing with joy and wonder. He dropped to his knees, that gesture of respect and love that had started everything, and pressed his forehead against her stomach. A child of both worlds, he whispered. Human and shifter, born of choice and love. Leona stroked his hair. Are you happy? He looked up at her, and she saw tears on his face, the first she had ever seen from him. Happy doesn't begin to cover it. You've given me everything. My sons. My heart. My purpose. And now this. We gave each other everything, Leona corrected. We built this together. Ash and Ember noticed their parents and came running. When Raiden told them about their new sibling, Ember's face lit up. I want a sister. I want a brother. Ash declared. You'll get what you get, Leona laughed. And you'll love them regardless. The children debated enthusiastically while Raiden stood and pulled Leona close once more. Do you remember what you told me? He asked. In the cellar, when I asked you to stay? Which part? You said I would spend the rest of my life proving you made the right choice. Leona smiled. I remember. Have I succeeded? She kissed him, soft and sweet and full of promise. You prove it every day. Every time you put our children first. Every time you choose mercy over dominance. Every time you look at me like I'm your whole world. You are my whole world, Raiden said seriously. You and our children. Everything else is just details. The pack began gathering for the evening meal, the valley filling with voices and laughter and the comfortable chaos of community. Leona and Raiden walked down together, their children racing ahead, their hands clasped between them. A family formed by an impossible choice. A love that defied boundaries. A future built on sacrifice and hope and the fierce determination to protect what mattered most. As the sun set over Moonfell, turning the sky gold and crimson, Leona looked at the life she had found, so different from anything she had imagined standing on her cottage threshold that storm-ravaged day. She had faced the raging river for 2 helpless pups, unaware she would change an alpha's fate. But the alpha had changed her fate too, in ways neither of them could have predicted. And she would choose it all again, every dangerous step, every terrifying moment, every leap of faith. Because this family, this love, this impossible, beautiful life, was worth everything. Hello friends. Thank you for journeying with Leona, Raiden, Ash, and Ember through this tale of love that transcends boundaries and families formed by choice rather than blood. If this story touched your heart, please share it and let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Your presence makes these stories come alive. Until our next tale, may you find the courage to face your own raging rivers, and may love find you in the most unexpected places.